You actually called the police, right in front of us? I did. Night shift cook. Single father. And you think that phone call means anything out here? That little girl is right up there, isn't she? Get on your knees. Buy her breakfast. Last warning. Derek Voss had 6 men, a tire iron through Marcus's windshield, and an 8-year-old girl sleeping in the room above them. He had every reason in the world to feel untouchable. What he didn't have was any red on the man standing in front of him. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't step back. He took the crumpled bills against his chest without flinching, gave Derek every chance to walk away, and only when none of those chances were taken did he set his jacket down, slow and deliberate, and say his final word on the matter. Derek was still smiling when he gave the order to close in. He had no idea how badly he'd just miscalculated. How long would it take Derek Voss to understand exactly what he'd walked into? If you're new here, this channel tells stories about the people you'd never expect to be the most dangerous person in the room. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The last bell of the school day had barely faded when Marcus Reyes pulled his SUV up to the curb outside Lincoln Elementary. The same faded blue Explorer he'd driven for 6 years, dent in the rear quarter panel, passenger mirror held together with electrical tape. He was, as always, exactly on time. Maya came through the double doors at a run, backpack bouncing, and climbed in before he'd even shifted into park. She dropped something into his lap without a word, a keychain she'd made in art class, a small painted star with her name scratched into the back. He turned it over once in his fingers, clipped it to his belt loop, and pulled out of the lot. That was most of their afternoons. Not dramatic. Dinner at home, homework at the kitchen table, Maya in bed by 9. Marcus had built their life around routine, because routine was the thing that held everything together after the rest of it fell apart. 4 years earlier, his wife Lauren had been killed in a crash on Route 9 on a Tuesday morning in November. In the months after, the only thing that kept him upright was the fact that a 7-year-old girl needed breakfast made, lunches packed, and someone in the second row at the winter recital. He stopped counting what he'd lost and started counting what he still had to show up for. He never talked about his work, not to the neighbors, not at school pickup, not even to Maya's teachers when they asked what he did. He told people he taught fitness classes for the Navy, which was technically true the way saying a surgeon works in a hospital is technically true. What Marcus actually did was run the Close Quarters Combat Program at Naval Special Warfare Group for training SEAL candidates in disarmament, restraint, and threat de-escalation. His commanding officer, Commander Angela Ward, had recruited him for the role herself after his last deployment overseas. She'd told him she needed someone who could teach the difference between controlled force and reckless force, and that there weren't many people left in the program who actually understood where that line sat. Marcus filed a written report to Ward after every training cycle. It was a habit she'd built into the program, and one he kept without complaint, the kind of discipline that looks unremarkable right up until it suddenly matters. At home, none of that mattered. At home, he was just Maya's dad. The arrangement with Finch's Lighthouse Diner had started 3 weeks earlier, after his mother-in-law, Rosalind Finch, had her left knee replaced at Ashford General. She'd owned the place for 22 years, a corner spot 2 blocks off the harbor that never closed and always smelled like coffee and fryer oil. Her regulars were truck drivers, dock workers, night shift nurses, and the occasional insomniac who just needed somewhere warm and lit. Rosalind swore she could manage on her own, which was exactly the kind of thing she always said right up until she tried to stand on the new knee 3 days post-op and nearly went down in the kitchen. After that, Marcus started covering nights while she recovered in the apartment upstairs. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't what he was trained for. But Rosalind had taken Maya in every time he'd deployed and never once complained. Pouring coffee 4 nights a week was the least he could do. The night everything changed, Maya's sitter had cancelled last minute, a text at 8:30, some excuse about a fever. Marcus drove Maya to the diner, got her settled upstairs with Rosalind, and was behind the counter by 9. The dinner rush thinned by 11. By 1 in the morning, the place was quiet. A retired nurse named Margaret was finishing her decoff at the end of the counter. 2 dock workers he recognized sat near the window.
Marcus was wiping down the espresso machine when the front door opened and the night changed shape. Underscore 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 underscore. 6 of them came in together, young, mid-20s at the oldest, moving through the door with the particular ease of people who'd never once had to wonder what anyone else in the room thought of them. They took over 2 full rows of booths up on the seats, cigarettes lit in open defiance of the no-smoking sign above their table.
One of them knocked a sugar dispenser off the counter and didn't bother looking down. Marcus recognized the group. He'd seen them around before, usually at night, usually right before something got broken or someone got scared. Locals called them the underdog crew, though nobody said it loud where the wrong people might hear. They'd spent months working the waterfront strip, pressuring shop owners for protection money, trashing storefronts that refused, making sure everyone understood the easiest path forward was to sell to Boss Development and move on. Nobody had proof yet. The link between the crew and the Voss real estate operation was the kind of thing the whole neighborhood suspected, and nobody could confirm exactly how Victor Voss preferred it. The one running the show was Derek Voss, Victor's son. Younger than Marcus expected the first time he saw him. Maybe 26, with a practiced smirk and the kind of confidence that only comes from a lifetime insulated from consequences. Derek sat in the center booth and looked at Marcus the way people look at furniture. Marcus set down a menu and asked if they wanted to order. Derek glanced at his crew, then back at Marcus, and said nothing. One of the others' wide-shouldered, shaved head, the others called him Duke, deliberately tipped his coffee mug off the table. It shattered on the tile. He looked at Marcus and said the mess wasn't going to clean itself. Marcus didn't move to pick anything up. He set a bar towel on the counter, looked at the table, and said they were welcome to order or welcome to leave. Those were the 2 options. Derek stood and walked toward the counter, and that's when he noticed the drawing taped to the wall behind the register, a kid's crayon picture, 2 stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun, and in careful crooked letters at the bottom. "Daddy is my hero." Derek studied it with mild amusement, then looked at Marcus. Said something about how touching it was, a man mopping up spills for minimum wage, and his little girl still thought he was worth admiring. Asked if Marcus thought she'd feel the same in a few years, once she understood what her father actually amounted to. Then he reached up and pulled the drawing off the wall. Margaret made a small sound of protest. One of the crew turned and knocked her coffee into her lap. When Marcus moved to help her, Derek dropped a folded wad of bills on the floor between them, crumpled 20s, the kind of money you throw rather than hand over, and told Marcus to get on his knees and pick it up. Said there might be enough there to cover Maya's breakfast. Marcus looked at the money. He looked at Margaret, pressing napkins to her blouse, trying not to show her hands were shaking. Then he reached under the counter and picked up the phone. He dialed 911 with Derek standing 3 feet away. Gave the dispatcher his name, the diner's address, and said he had 6 people refusing to leave and actively threatening customers. Gave a description of the group. He did it all in a flat, level voice, like Derek wasn't even in the room. Something shifted in Derek's face. Not anger exactly, something more specific. The look of a man who's decided an insult requires a response. Derek leaned across the counter and told Marcus his shift was almost over, and the crew would be outside waiting when it ended. He wanted to see how long the hero act held up when nobody was around to watch. They left, and the diner went quiet. Marcus walked Margaret to her car, then the dock workers, watching until each one had driven off. Then he locked the front door and stood at the window a moment with the lights still on. Upstairs, he heard Maya's voice through the ceiling, asking if everything was okay. She'd heard yelling. He told her everything was fine, that nobody could get up to where she was. Through the glass, he could see Derek's truck parked under a broken street lamp across from the diner. As he watched, figures began emerging from the shadows, one at a time, moving into the lot from different angles, carrying bags and what looked like tools. Some had long objects tucked under their coats. Marcus called 911 a second time. The dispatcher told him units were tied up at a bad accident near the port and someone would respond, but she couldn't give him a timeline. He understood what that meant. If he stayed inside, Derek had every incentive to escalate, break windows, start a fire, force the issue. And if that happened with Maya and Rosalind on the second floor, the only way out for them ran straight through whatever was waiting in that lot. He went upstairs long enough to tell Rosalind to lock the apartment door, pull the curtains, and stay away from the windows no matter what she heard. He didn't explain why. She'd known him long enough to understand that when he used that tone, explanations came later. Back downstairs, he picked up the deposit bag from behind the counter and stood at the back door a moment. There was a version of tonight where he waited it out, doors locked, lights on, hoping the police got there before someone put a torch to the place. But that version required 6 dangerous men to make patient, reasonable decisions for an unknown length of time, with his daughter asleep 30 feet above the room they were threatening to break into. Marcus unlatched the deadbolt and stepped outside. They came out of the dark the moment the door clicked shut behind him. 6 of them, closing from 3 directions at once, sealing off the alley to his left, the gap by the dumpsters, and the direct path to the street. The setup was practiced enough that Marcus knew instantly this wasn't their first time doing this. They'd positioned themselves before he ever stepped out, which meant they'd been watching the back of the building long enough to know exactly where the exits were. He still had the deposit bag in his left hand. He didn't set it down yet. Standing with his back to the door, he took stock, mixed group, at least 3 visible weapons, his SUV 20 feet to his right with the driver's window already caved in by a tire iron. Duke leaned against it, arms crossed. Maya's backpack had been pulled from the back seat and dropped in a puddle near the rear tire. Derek walked over and stepped on it slowly, looking up at the lit second-floor window. "She's up there, right? Your little girl." Something changed in Marcus's face. Not a man trying to hold it together, the opposite. A kind of settling, like a drop in temperature. Derek noticed it, and for a second the smirk flickered, then one of his crew laughed at something and the moment passed. Marcus set the deposit bag on the hood of the nearest car, kept both hands visible, and told them to leave the property. He said it flat, like reading coordinates off a map. No heat. First warning. The crew found that genuinely funny. Derek walked over and threw a folded stack of bills at Marcus's chest, the same crumpled money from the diner floor, and told him to get on his knees and apologize for making that call. Said a man who spent his nights pouring coffee for truckers didn't get to act like he had authority over anything. Second warning. Toward the back of the group, the youngest one, a 20-year-old named Ryan, always trying to keep up with the others, slipped his phone out and started recording. He'd had the idea back in the diner. Footage of some diner worker getting taken apart in a parking lot would rack up views before sunrise. Derek had already told him to put it away once. So Ryan did the obvious thing, pretended to comply, slid the phone into his breast pocket, lens out, and left it running. Nobody noticed. Derek moved closer and laid out exactly what was coming next. After they finished with Marcus out here, 2 of the crew were going upstairs. He wanted the people in that apartment to understand how things worked in this neighborhood. He said it with the casual certainty of a man who'd never once been told no by anyone who could back it up. Marcus reached up and took off his jacket. Folded it once, laid it across the SUV's hood. Then he unclipped the small star-shaped keychain from his belt loop, Maya's keychain, the one she'd handed him that afternoon, and pressed it into his front pocket. He looked back at Derek. Last warning. Duke didn't wait for a signal. He raised the tire iron with both hands and swung it straight at Marcus's head. It didn't land. Marcus stepped into the swing instead of away from it, closing the distance so fast the arc ran out of momentum before it reached him. He caught Duke's forearm on the way through, redirected the weight into a lock, and drove the bigger man's wrist down and back in one motion. The tire iron hit the asphalt. Duke went down on one knee with a sound that wasn't quite a shout, and Marcus guided him the rest of the way to the ground. The whole exchange took under 3 seconds. The man behind him, circling wide with a length of pipe, came in fast from the left. Marcus turned into it, let the pipe swing wide past his shoulder,
and used the man's own momentum to put him face-first into the SUV's already dented hood.
The metal crumpled a little more. He didn't get up.
5 seconds in, and the two biggest members of the Undertow crew were on the ground. The rest went still for the space of a breath, long enough for something to shift in the air of that parking lot. Derek had walked in with a set of assumptions about who Marcus Reyes was, and every one of them was now being proven wrong in real time.
3 came at once.
One had a folding knife, one had a length of rebar, and the third, a wiry man in a gray hoodie, broke off and sprinted for the back door, toward the stairs to the second floor. Marcus read all 3 lines at once. He grabbed the knife holder by the collar and yanked him into the rebar's path, sending both men stumbling into each other, then cut toward the third before either could recover. He caught the hoodie man 4 steps from the door, hauled him down onto the asphalt with just enough force to end the run without lasting damage, took a hammer away from him mid-swing, and tossed it under the dumpster. He was breathing harder now, but not much. What held his attention was the window above the back door, because in the half-second he'd spent stopping that run, he'd caught the curtain move.
A small hand pulling it back.
A child's face at the glass.
Maya was watching. He'd known on some level this was possible.
She was curious, sharp, and 8 years old enough to understand that whatever was happening in the lot below her window wasn't something a phone call could fix. Marcus held on to that thought the way you hold on to something that keeps you from going somewhere you shouldn't. She was watching, which meant however he handled the next 60 seconds was the version of him she'd carry for the rest of her life. He didn't get long to sit with that. From behind him, one of the 2 men who hadn't yet committed hurled a glass bottle at the second-floor window. Marcus turned and moved at the same time, getting his arm up. The bottle caught his shoulder and shattered against the brick above the sill instead of the glass. In the half-second his attention shifted, the 6th man hit him from behind with a stun gun, jamming it between his shoulder blades. The contact was off-center, but his left arm went numb from the shoulder down.
And that was enough.
In the brief struggle, the stun gun clattered loose, and Ryan's phone jostled free of his pocket, skidded across the asphalt, and came to rest near the dumpster, face down, still recording.
Derek picked up the tire iron Duke had dropped.
For the first time all night, Marcus was genuinely at a disadvantage, one arm barely responding, 2 crew members still up, and Derek closing in with what looked like real intent instead of theater. Marcus used the gap between the SUV and the car parked beside it to keep Derek from getting around his weak side, dropped the 6th man with one controlled strike to the back of the knee, then turned to face Derek directly.
Derek swung twice.
Marcus deflected both off his forearm and elbow, rode the 3rd swing past him, and when Derek overextended, stepped inside his guard and took him down.
Derek hit the asphalt and went still. Then the performance started.
Derek said it had all been a joke, that none of it was serious, that Marcus had clearly misread the situation and there was money available to make the whole thing disappear right now, if that's what he wanted. When Marcus didn't answer, Derek's tone changed. He said his father owned the property on both sides of this block and 3 more beyond it. Said that by morning, Marcus would be the one in handcuffs, and once the lawyers were through, no one in this city would let a man with his record anywhere near a child. Marcus understood exactly what Derek was doing and exactly why the words still landed. He could take a physical beating and keep functioning, that part of his training had been tested plenty. What he couldn't absorb without flinching was the idea of Maya being pulled out of his home because someone with enough money decided to rewrite what happened in this parking lot. He held Derek in the control hold, pulled out his phone, and called 911 a 3rd time. Told the dispatcher 6 people were down in the rear lot of Finch's Lighthouse Diner, that there were multiple weapons on the ground, that a child was in the building, and that he needed immediate assistance. Then he released Derek, stepped back 3 paces, and raised both hands.
The first patrol car arrived 90 seconds later. What the officers found didn't tell a simple story.
6 men down in various states of injury.
Broken glass and scattered tools across the lot.
A deposit bag sitting on a car hood. 1 man standing in the middle of it with his hands up. Derek was already on his feet and already talking by the time the second car arrived. He told the officers Marcus had lured the group into the back lot under the pretense of negotiating, then attacked without provocation once they were off the street. He described the group as acquaintances who'd stopped by to discuss business and had no idea they were walking into danger. The camera above the diner's back door had been spray-painted over recently, and quickly, sometime before Marcus stepped outside. Victor Voss arrived before Marcus finished giving his preliminary statement, flanked by 2 attorneys and a certainty about how the night would end that made Marcus's stomach tighten. Victor spoke quietly with the senior officer on scene, and the conversation ran longer than it should have. Within the hour, Marcus was told to come in for a formal statement. The Navy's duty officer was notified, and by 2 in the morning, Marcus learned his instructional duties at the base were suspended pending review. Because Maya had been in the building during the altercation, a child welfare officer was contacted for a mandatory assessment.
Rosalind brought Maya downstairs once the lot was secured. She walked past the broken glass, the scuffed pavement, the officers in their vests, without looking at any of it, and went straight to Marcus. She wrapped her arms around him and pressed her face into his jacket. He held her with the one arm that still worked, the other half numb from the stun gun. After a while, she looked up and asked the one question he had no answer for: were they going to take her away from him?
Marcus had survived things that demanded he keep moving when every instinct said stop. He'd lost the person he loved and found a way to keep functioning. He'd stood in a parking lot against 6 armed men without once losing track of what he was protecting. But standing there with Maya's face turned up toward his, waiting for a reassurance he couldn't honestly give, was the most exposed he'd felt in 4 years. He pulled her closer and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer, and the worst moment of the whole night. The formal interview began at 9 the next morning in a conference room at the Harborview Police Precinct. The attorneys Victor Voss brought made their strategy clear within the first 20 minutes. They weren't going to dispute that the fight happened. They were going to argue about what kind of man Marcus Reyes was and what a man like that did when he got angry. The lead attorney laid it out with practiced confidence: Marcus's military background, the years of specialized training, the specific skills he'd been paid to develop, weren't a mitigating factor, they were an aggravating one. A civilian who reacted violently to a threat could claim fear as a defense. A man who'd spent 2 decades learning exactly how to disable people as efficiently as possible couldn't credibly claim he had no alternative. 6 young men came to the property for a conversation and left in ambulances, and the person responsible was sitting right across the table. Derek sat beside his father and said nothing, the most disciplined Marcus had ever seen him. Marcus's own attorney, Patricia Owens, who'd handled Navy personnel cases for 11 years, objected to the framing and pushed for the investigation to account for the earlier threats inside the diner and the documented 911 calls Marcus made before ever stepping outside. The Voss attorneys acknowledged the calls and suggested Marcus made them to build a narrative before carrying out a premeditated attack. It was a precise, cynical argument, and Marcus could see in Patricia's face that she understood exactly what it was designed to do: drag the process out long enough that the pressure became unbearable. He sat there thinking about Maya upstairs at the diner with Rosalind, waiting. What changed the room came from outside it. Sergeant Rosa Alvarez knocked and stepped in just before 10, and the way she carried herself told Marcus something had shifted before she said a word. She'd been processing evidence from the lot since early morning. Among the items collected, a phone found face down near the dumpster, screen cracked, still recording when officers bagged it. It belonged to Ryan. The footage was straightforward. 8 minutes, starting before Marcus ever stepped outside. It showed the crew positioning themselves around the lot. Showed Duke taking the tire iron to the SUV window. Showed Derek pulling Maya's backpack from the back seat and dropping it in the puddle. It showed Marcus coming through the back door with the deposit bag, hands deliberately visible. It showed Derek stepping on the backpack, looking up at the lit window. It captured all 3 warnings, clear enough on audio to leave no room for interpretation. It showed Duke starting the attack, and it showed, in detail, the difference between what Marcus did and what a man who'd lost control would have done. Every time a crew member stopped being a threat, Marcus stopped. He didn't chase anyone down. He didn't keep a weapon he'd taken. He put Duke on the ground and stepped back. When he took the hammer from the man near the stairs, he threw it into the shadows instead of holding onto it. The video ended with Derek on the ground making threats about his father's property holdings, and Marcus on the phone with the dispatcher, hands already rising before the first patrol car reached the lot.
Ryan had wanted footage that would humiliate a man.
What he'd actually created was a complete record of the night, built by the crew's own arrogance, preserved on a phone that slipped from his pocket during the chaos and turned up 12 inches from a dumpster during a routine sweep.
The boss attorneys asked for time to confer privately. It was granted. They came back and said very little. Commander Angela Ward arrived at the precinct that afternoon. Marcus hadn't called her.
She'd been notified through the Navy's duty officer when the suspension was filed, and drove down from the base herself once she'd reviewed the situation. 51 years old, uniform worn without any effort toward impressiveness, the manner of someone who'd spent 3 decades making decisions other people found difficult.
She met with the investigating detectives for 40 minutes.
Marcus wasn't in the room, but Patricia was, and when she came out, she told him to sit tight.
Ward's press statement that afternoon was short.
She confirmed Marcus's position at Naval Special Warfare Group 4 and the nature of his instructional work. She said the recovered footage showed a man applying, under extreme duress and with his own child at direct risk, the exact principles his program was built around: warning before acting, protecting bystanders, removing weapons from a situation first, disengaging the moment a threat was neutralized. She said that, having supervised Marcus's work for years and reviewed his training reports firsthand, nothing in that footage surprised her. Then, before stepping away from the microphones, she added one more thing: Marcus Reyes hadn't acted like a man who wanted a fight. He'd acted like a father who knew exactly what he was protecting.
The Navy lifted the suspension that same evening.
The child welfare assessment, opened as a mandatory procedure, closed within 48 hours. The caseworker's report noting that the adult in question hadn't placed the child in danger. He'd identified the danger, drawn it away from where she slept, and neutralized it in a manner consistent with his professional training. The report also noted the child appeared securely attached, well cared for, and showed no distress beyond what was reasonable given the previous night. The criminal process moved slower, the way it always does, but it moved. Derek and 5 members of the Undertow crew were charged on multiple counts: conspiracy to commit assault, weapons possession, criminal destruction of property, and making threats against a minor. Ryan negotiated a reduced deal through cooperation, giving investigators a detailed account of the crew's operations over the preceding 8 months, specific incidents, specific instructions Derek had relayed from his father. That cooperation, paired with subpoenaed financial records from Voss Development, opened a separate inquiry into Victor Voss's company. Business owners along the waterfront who'd stayed quiet for months started coming forward one at a time. The pressure that had made the whole neighborhood feel sealed shut began to lift. The diner was repaired through a collection that organized itself. Dock workers, restaurant staff, a few of the regular nurses passed the word, and within 2 weeks the back lot was resurfaced, the broken window replaced, the damaged walls repainted. The SUV needed more than cosmetic work. A group of mechanics from a shop 4 blocks over towed it in, spent a week on it, and returned it without a bill. When Marcus picked it up, he found Maya's star keychain hanging from the rearview mirror. Someone had put it there while the car was in the shop. He stood beside the truck a moment before getting in. The idea started with a question Marcus couldn't stop turning over. 2 weeks back at the base, running the same curriculum he always ran, he found himself thinking about Margaret, the nurse who'd been sitting at the end of the counter when the crew came through the door. She'd been frightened in a way that stayed with her, even though nothing physical had happened to her. She had no training that would have changed that.
Most people didn't.
He'd spent years teaching specialized skills to people who were already physically capable and psychologically selected for high-stress work, and never once aimed any of it at the people who actually needed it most. The woman coming off a double shift at 2 in the morning. The delivery driver parking in an unlit lot. The parent walking alone to their car in a garage. He talked to the precinct's community liaison officer, a 15-year veteran named Frank Delaney, and to 2 former SEAL colleagues living in the area. He talked to Rosalind, who offered the diner's back dining room for evening sessions once she was back on her feet. He put together a framework and called it Sentinel Watch, free self-defense and situational awareness instruction, open to anyone who worked nights, lived alone, or just wanted to think practically about personal safety. The first session ran on a Tuesday evening, 6 weeks after the parking lot.
53 people showed up. Margaret sat near the back. A woman who drove overnight delivery routes sat beside her. 3 restaurant workers, a convenience store clerk, a man who said he'd walked home from the bus stop at midnight for years and had been nervous about it the whole time. Marcus stood in front of them with no ceremony and started talking. He told them the first lesson wasn't about how to hurt someone, it was about recognition. How to spot danger before it arrives. How most situations give you a window to leave before they force you to stay. How knowing what you're willing to stand for changes every calculation that follows. He said understanding your own line mattered more than any technique, because technique without judgment is just more chaos poured into an already chaotic situation. Margaret raised her hand from the back. She asked how he'd stayed calm with 6 people threatening his daughter, whether that kind of calm could actually be taught, or whether some people were just built differently. Marcus looked at her for a moment. His eyes went to the corner, where Maya sat cross-legged on the floor working through homework with a highlighter and a water bottle, the same as she did most evenings at the diner counter. Then he looked back at Margaret. He said the calm wasn't a personality trait, it was the result of knowing exactly what he was protecting. He said that when Maya was at that window watching him, he wasn't just trying to get through the situation, he was aware, the whole time, that she'd carry what she saw into the rest of her life. He wasn't only keeping her safe from 6 men in a parking lot. He was keeping her safe from the memory of her father becoming something she wouldn't recognize. The room stayed quiet in the way that means people are actually absorbing something, rather than just waiting for the next line. Finch's Lighthouse Diner looked mostly like it always had. The coffee still came out a little strong. The booths by the back window were always the last to fill. Marcus was behind the counter on Thursday nights while Rosalind rested her knee, same as before. Maya did her homework at the table nearest the register. The same spot she'd claimed for herself the first night he brought her along. Her drawing was back on the wall behind the counter, retaped in the same place, a little wrinkled but intact. Marcus had added a line beneath her words, in his own handwriting, small enough that you had to stand close to read it. Maya's line said, "Daddy is my hero." His said, "A hero isn't the strongest person in the room. It's the person who knows what their strength is for." The strongest people you'll ever meet aren't the ones who look the part, they're the ones who already decided, long before the moment arrived, exactly what they're willing to protect, and exactly how far they're willing to go to protect it. That's what keeps them from crossing the line when it would be so easy to. And that's the kind of strength that stays with a child for the rest of her life.